So welcome everybody to the Australian University's Census on Staff Wellbeing report. The authors of the report are myself, Professor Kurt Lushington, Dr. Amy Zaddo and Daniel Nisa. This is an ARC Laureate project and it's supported by Transitioning Well, Dr. Sarah Cotton and the Tertiary Education Union, Gabe Gooding, and Superfriend, Professor Ross Lyon. And the project had ethics approval from the University of South Australia Ethics Committee. So we acknowledge the Kaurna people as the traditional custodians of the Adelaide Plains, and we pay our respects to elders past and present. And we honour their enduring connection to land, waters and culture. We extend our respects to any Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islanders joining us today. Thank you. So a big thank you, first of all, to all the participants in the census. Like across the sector, we had 11,477 staff who responded from across 42 universities. So this is a really awesome effort, and we wouldn't be able to do this kind of work without your participation and support. So today we have three other speakers: Professor Scott Bowman, who's the Vice-Chancellor, Maureen Boland, who's the CEO of Safe Work Australia, and Gabe Gooding, who's the Assistant National Secretary of the National Tertiary Education Union. So I'm going to speak first. My name is Maureen Dollard, and I'm going to provide an overview of the results and release the league table of university performance on psychosocial safety climate. And then the other speakers will come on, and then we'll think about what we're going to do next. We'll share that information with you. So the Australian university sector is facing a growing crisis in staff psychological health and safety. Over recent decades, Australian universities have undergone profound transformation with deregulation, intensified competition, cuts to funding, job insecurity, and a profit and productivity agenda that's reshaping the sector. So we've conducted a 5-year national study previously, which showed widespread psychosocial risk and distress across the sector, driven by years of restructuring, increasing workloads and digital stress. And despite multiple government reviews of the higher education sector, including the Australian Universities Accord and a Senate inquiry just recently, little attention has been given to staff wellbeing. So, for example, if you look at the Australian Universities Accord, which is a blueprint for the future of Australian universities, there's 15 mentions of student wellbeing and only 1 of staff wellbeing. So in response to this lack of response in the sector, we've launched the Australian University Census on Staff Wellbeing as a sector-wide name and support public health and sustainability initiative. Universities are highly motivated by league tables, but none of the league tables that we know of actually assess the working conditions of staff. So the census aims to understand the scale of psychosocial risk in the sector and provide an evidence base to reform risk management across universities. So the census really tried to assess the psychosocial safety climate, and this is the only thing that we rank the universities on. And it refers to the organisational climate for worker psychological health and safety, and we can call it PSC for short. So PSC measures the organisational values and systems for the protection of worker psychological health. So it assesses senior management commitment to stress prevention, senior management priority that's placed on psychological health versus productivity imperatives, communication about work stress and safety, and participation and consultation across all levels of the organisation. So PSC is driven by the value that worker psychological health is a priority and as important as productivity. The concept is an Australian innovation and has inspired over 300 empirical studies across 39 countries. You can go to our website and see what those studies are. And it's a leading indicator of many, many different working conditions, work stresses, job strain, mental health, burnout, productivity, etc. And we refer to it as a cause of the causes of work stress. And I'll show you some models on that kind of relationship. So if we were to measure psychosocial safety climate, these are the items that you would respond to. And you will remember this. This was in the survey that you answered. It was like right up front in the survey. Management commitment, senior management acts decisively when a concern of employees' psychological status is raised. Management priority, senior management clearly considers the psychological health of employees to be of great importance. Organisational communication, information about workplace psychological wellbeing is always brought to my attention by my manager/supervisor. And participation and consultation in psychological health and safety occurs with employees, unions, and worker health and safety representatives in my workplace. So 4 different dimensions of psychosocial safety climate. So in the literature, a pretty well-cited, very well-cited model of work stress is the job demands resources model by Arnold Bakker and Eva Damaruti from the Netherlands. And it says that, you know, in a job, there are certain tasks that you have to perform. These are job demands, and there are certain things that help you get the job done. These are job resources. And the way these kind of work together and interact can predict, you know, your exposure to stresses. And so it could result in psychological distress, emotional exhaustion, depression or physical health problems. For example, if you have too much work pressure, if you have a lot of emotional demands to cope with, if there are, you know, heavy cognitive demands, which there is in academic work, there's role conflict, not being certain about what your role is, organizational change like restructuring, mergers, these things are demanding, bullying and harassment, etc. That said, if we have adequate resources, these could offset some of these demands, but actually some of these resources themselves become psychosocial risks because you might not have adequate supervisor support, you might not have adequate co-worker support, you may not have adequate control over your working circumstances in terms of decision authority or how you do your job. You may not receive rewards and recognition for your job, and procedural justice may be in deficit. And so the lack of change consultation is another issue in the tertiary sector. So all those things in low supply can lead to health issues, which going across the top can lead to health outcomes like absenteeism, injuries, workers' compensation. But managed well, these things could lead to engagement, to job satisfaction, and less intention to leave, and work performance. But we asked the question, well, where do all these things come from? And we, in our own research, basically this concept emerged. And after some thought, this is what we consider is the situation. That the psychosocial safety climate, if we know about this, we can predict future demands and resources and health and engagement, all those other things on the right-hand side of the screen. So knowing about management commitment, priority, communication, participation, or consultation. With that kind of mindset, where we are concerned about worker psychological health and well-being, we will shape the work environment so that the work pressure is not overwhelming, that emotional demands are within our capabilities of managing in terms of the resources that are available to us. So it's a leading indicator of everything on the right. We say if you look at psychosocial safety climate, you can probably determine all these other things in an organisation or across organisations. And if you focus on psychosocial safety climate, this is primary prevention. If you focus on changing the job, this is secondary. If you send people to the EAP, that's tertiary. We want to prevent everything on the right. We build the psychosocial safety climate. So, yeah, a cause of the causes. So we've developed benchmark risk levels for psychosocial safety climate. So the scores on the measure go from 12 to 60. So greater than 41 we think is low risk based on looking at correlations in the data with big Australian data sets, looking at the relationship between the levels of PSC, depression, and future job strain. And so these are the risk levels. So green is good. There's a medium risk, then there's a high risk where the scores are less than 37 but greater than 26, and then less than or equal to 26, very high risk. So as we go through the results, the green is good, and obviously the pink and the red, orange and the red, things are getting worse. And very serious, like in the very high risk, people in this zone report serious clinical depressive symptoms, 3 times the rate of people in the low risk psychosocial safety climate. Within 12 months, the rates are 3 times as high. So when we look at the response rate and our methodology, we collected data from the 4th of October to the 7th of January this year. So from 4th of October last year to January 7th this year, we used a diverse sampling strategy. We had our own contact list from the research that we'd previously done in the sector. We had a NT-EU data set of union and non-union members. We wrote to the Vice-Chancellors and invited them to send out emails to staff. So it might have turned up like that, or through university newsletters, through social media, or professional associations. So across the sector in total, we had a 7.65% response rate, and it varied from 4 to 21% across the sector. And only 36 out of the 42 universities that we surveyed had at least 100, and we had a threshold of 100 to be included. So there were 6 that didn't meet the threshold, and they're listed there. So here on the left-hand side, we've got data. So remember, the green is good and going down, red is bad, obviously. And the first line is the Australian Workplace Barometer of nearly 1,600 workers, general population of workers. Then Superfriend, also the general population of workers, 10,000. And then the Victorian public sector across the Victorian public sector, nearly 46,000 workers. So you can see there the breakdown of risk levels. So that's something you can look at that. So Superfriend, for example, has 54% in the green and 38% in the high to very high risk PSC. And then through the university study that I mentioned before, led by Professor Kurt Lushington, you can see in 2020 with 2,000 university personnel, it was only 28% in the green and went down to 16% over those years, across the 5 years. And you can see the red growing. This is why we became concerned about what was going on in the sector, even more concerned that had no reaction, hence the idea of sharing this information publicly. So this is the census data. So this is now your responses, 11,477, 18% in the green and 76% in the high to very high risk PSC range. So this is a very poor response from the sector in terms of the psychosocial safety climate. And it pretty much matches up with what we were seeing in our own research the years before. So when we look at the demographics of our sample, you can just, quickly see that across all of those demographics that, we are seeing high risk. There are a few exceptions to that. That is with gender, people preferring not to answer, probably because they are, vulnerable because of their working circumstances, and people agender, very high risk. And then over on the other side, you see the academic area, you see human society, language, communication, culture, creative arts and writing, history, heritage, archaeology, philosophy and religious studies, and Indigenous studies. These are all humanities, arts, social sciences that are, constantly under threat of losing their place in the university. So that's not majorly surprising, but it's just not good enough. Now, if you look to the top two categories on the right-hand side, academic role, professional role, you can see that the only difference here is that if your position is dean or above, they are reporting low risk. And moving down to the next one, if you're senior management in a professional role, you see the psychosocial risk at about the medium level. So what we can see is overall, the results show that the differences in demographics in the sample are not really a great explanation for the PSC results overall. What we do see is a disconnect between senior management and workers on the issue, which we see over and over in the literature. So here is the, at the bottom, again, 12 to 60 for the psychosocial safety climate results. The average for SuperFriend data is 40. The average for the AWB is 42. These are the big data sets we talked about before. And here comes the results of our university. The participant average score across the 11,477 was 29.5. which is, you know, in the high risk on average. And here are the rest. So 100% of the universities reported PSC levels on average in the high or very high risk PSC categories. And 76% of the staff reported risky PSC levels. So just in terms of pure numbers, 8,719 workers that responded to the survey were reporting risky levels of PSC. I forgot to mention at the beginning that this is a webinar. It is being recorded. If you would like to make comments or ask questions, you can put them in the chat, and we'll try to answer these and post it on our website, and we'll give you details of where you can find that website a bit later. So the top 3 Australian universities performers on PSC are the Charles Darwin University, and that's why Professor Scott Bowman is with us today, because he is representing, as the Vice-Chancellor, Charles Darwin University. The second is the University of New South Wales, and the third is the University of Queensland. So you can see from the university rankings that there are 6, I think there are 2, 4, 6 in the very high risk on average, and the rest in the high risk. So if you break down each university according to the spread of the scores across the risk levels, you can see Charles Darwin, 36% are in the good zone, and quite a few in the high risk, very high risk, and it just deteriorates as you go down. So the green in the graph is what we want to see in the future. We want to see a lot more green, but at the moment there is a sea of red. So when we look at psychosocial safety climate, we can look in the data and see how it correlates with other things. And, you know, we're ranking universities by their level of psychosocial safety climate. And then it's important to know that that also relates to many other things. It relates to how people see the psychosocial safety climate in at the faculty level. It relates to organizational change and restructuring. So those numbers can vary from -1 to +1. So these are very strong relationships. So what it means is, for example, as PSC increases, organizational change or restructuring in the organization is likely to decrease. And looking at the league table, if you're high on PSC, you're probably lower on organizational change. So you can see these like link ups in the census rankings. Hours to work pay difference, I'll talk a bit more about that. Job insecurity, emotional exhaustion, high levels of PSC, lower levels of emotional exhaustion, you can prevent it. High levels of PSC, better engagement, more job satisfaction, and less intention to leave. You can study this later, but everything above the diagonal line are all the correlations at the university level. So the fact that there's correlation at the university level means that there's something typical of that university that makes them a bit different from the next university, which makes them line up differently in terms of how they correlate with other things. And below the diagonal is just everybody's individual response. We're going to point to a big report, a technical report on this, and a short report. I'll give you the details as we go along. So in terms of emotional exhaustion, the top line on this graph is the Australian Workplace Barometer results, and the next line is the census results. So in terms of exhaustion, 82% of the staff in our sample report had a very high emotional exhaustion compared to 41% in the national samples. So it just means that people are just, quite exhausted and drained and find it hard to get energized and feel mentally exhausted at the end of the day. And in terms of work engagement, which is what universities, would be quite interested in is, how to keep people engaged. Well, engagement is suffering because the PSC is not very good. So the census staff were less engaged at work compared to national samples. So you can look at, again, against the AWB benchmark, you can see just a lot more green, which is, feeling energized and active and enthusiastic about work, every day or at least a few times a week, versus the Australian census data at the top. So we did some work looking at the hours people work above their contract. So all these like technical graphs, but and then we put a dollar value on that, and we estimated that in our sample alone, there is $271 million worth of work that is done by you that is not paid for. But the problem with this, even though it's probably a great saving for the sector, the actual hours worked over the contract significantly relates to emotional exhaustion, also to psychosocial safety climate. So again, this is a cost that's being transferred to workers. So reflections on, what we found so far. This is a sector problem as much as a university problem. You could see that really the sector looked pretty, it was a common sight to see red and orange on those graphs. So it's a sector problem as much as a university problem, but universities do vary. And so what we want is we want to see the vice chancellors. We want to see, a change in mindset about how they look at worker psychological health and well-being. Protecting workers from psychosocial risk is a legal obligation and a basic human right. Staff are working in circumstances that endanger their psychological health. The pressure for productivity is driving over contract hours worked, and that is leading to emotional exhaustion. So if we continue like this, we think that high quality education, world-class research and student experiences will be compromised. And universities can rebuild trust and strengthen performance and create workplaces by building the psychosocial safety climate. And yeah, we hope to be able to redo the census next year to see what the improvements are. So what we're calling for is we are calling for, and we agree with the government, goal of having universities as exemplary employers who provide decent and safe working conditions. So we do need increased funding to universities. It's been cut significantly over the years to ease the productivity pressures on staff. We think maintenance of mentally healthy workplaces could be included in the higher education framework standards. So that, if you're going to be a university, you have to comply with this standard. That the PSC tool could be adopted as a national standard for psychosocial risk assessment across the sector. And for transparency, PSC could be independently administered on a regular basis, and a table of PSC of university performance on PSC can be published for transparency and accountability. PSC could be adopted by the sector as a KPI for senior management. And we advocate a staff-centred approach to strategic operations, and that be adopted across the universities. We think that the student-centred approach, which has been adopted and has been dominant for many years, has been at the deficit of valuing the health and well-being of the staff. So thank you very much. And now I'd like to invite Professor Scott Bowman, VC. Now you know the university is the Charles Darwin University. For Scott to say a few words.
Thanks very much, Maureen. Look, first thing to say, I'm not here because we came top of the ranking. We're marginally better than some of the other universities on this survey. We have still got 56% of our staff, our people, reporting that they are at high risk or very high risk. So I'm not doing a lap of honour around the university saying just how brilliant we are. We have got a long way to go to this. I'm here really because I am really interested in this, and you saw our participation rate was relatively high. I think that's because we really pushed this survey. I sent a number of emails out, communicated with people and said, please get involved with this, and please say how you're experiencing the workplace. Tell us the good, well, tell the survey the good, but also the bad, because I was really interested to see how we would go in this area. It's an area I am interested in, and I know it's an area that a lot of our staff are struggling with workloads. I acknowledge that our workloads are very high. I acknowledge that there is a lot of stresses around productivity. And I think we're in a period also where the environment is not very sympathetic towards universities. And we see a lot of negative commentary about universities, which is the environment our staff work in. I think also, I've been the VC of 2 universities now. I think one of the things that really leads to a lot of this stress is a divide between the management of the university and other people working in the university. And it was very interesting, that result. You know, the 2 areas that had lower risk were people above deans and senior managers. And I do worry about that divide. We do everything we can here to break that down. I was just going to give you a couple of examples. So, you know, the year before last, so going into last year, our finances looked dire, just like many universities in Australia. And we looked around and we saw mass layoffs. You know, we saw 250 layoffs here, 150 there. And we looked at our finances, and, you know, to pull them into line, we would have had to lose round about 120 to 150 staff. I went to council and said to council, look, I don't think we should be taking the path of the other universities. I really think that we should try and tough this out. Let's try and solve these problems over the next year or 2, rather than, you know, do a restructure. I've been involved in restructures and they never work. They never work. All they do is just put lots of pressure and stress on the staff. And when you get into that cycle, you do a restructure, things are okay for a year or 2, and then you're back into a boom and bust and you have to do another restructure. What we did, we went out to the staff, we explained the financial situation, we were incredibly open. And I think what we say a lot to our staff is, look, we're all in this together. Let's all work through these problems. Let's come up with common solutions. We use the term collective brain, and I literally communicate on a weekly basis with staff and say, look, we've got this problem. I've got one brain to work on this. Can I engage the collective brain of the university? Because, you know, for us, 1,500 brains working on a problem is much better than my feeble brain. So I think we have built up that bit of a feel that there is an honesty coming from the top. We are very open. We are all in this together. I think that does relieve a lot of pressure on people. We have obviously got programs around well-being. I think communication from the top is really important. I'm not saying that that solves all the problems of very high workloads, but I think it does take one element of stress out. I would just encourage all universities and all university management to really get involved in this survey. And I mean, the results are quite stark. I just didn't realise there was so much difference between our sector and the rest of Australian industry. I mean, that is, for me, a massive wake-up call, but it should be a wake-up call to the whole of the sector, I think. I'll probably stop there, Maureen. Oh, can I just finish by thanking you and your team for running this survey. It's provided us with a lot of useful information, and I'll probably finish up there from beautiful Larrakia country.
Thank you very much, Scott. Really very, very helpful reflections. And yeah, we really appreciate the fact that you've jumped on board and supported it as much as you have. And whilst also acknowledging that there's work to be done, we really do appreciate that. We do need a response from the Vice-Chancellors on this. So we're very, very grateful for your support. Now I would like to ask Murray Boland to say a few words.
Thanks, Maureen, and the team for your important work in this space and for inviting me here to talk at the event this morning. I'm coming to you from Canberra, from Ngunnawal country, and I acknowledge the traditional owners of the land I'm on and pay my respects to First Nations people at the event as well. So yeah, look, obviously a lot of you know that preventing workplace injury, both physical and psychological, is the key focus of the work of Safe Work Australia. There are laws in place, as we know, that cover both, but we also know from the work that we're doing and from whenever I go around now to businesses, unions, workplaces, any sort of event really, people are always asking about how to manage psychosocial hazards in the workplace. And it is an area that most employers are still grappling with. However, I mean, my message is always, it's very clear and it's very easy in some ways. The duties in the model laws are clear. They require employers to do as much as they reasonably can to eliminate or minimise psychosocial risks. A good starting point is the Model Code of Practice, which Safe Work Australia has developed, which provides very clear, I think, advice on, what can be done, steps that can be taken, and the basic risk management processes that everybody is familiar with when it comes to preventing physical injury. And it's the same approach when you consider managing risks to psychological injury. The fundamentals are the same, talking to your staff, talking to them about the risks, identifying the risks, coming up with solutions, with the key being consultation. And I think the approach that Professor Bowman just outlined, it demonstrates in a way that consultation is the key. And also that it's not just about communication from the top, but that it's that collaborative approach and that kind of many brains in the room, and that, when the management is struggling for a solution, often it's the workers on the ground who can provide it. So the emphasis on consultation can't be stressed too much, I think. And also, I think the other thing I like to stress is that really, this sense of, it's all too hard. It's really a matter of approaching managing psychosocial risks with the same rigor, the same systems, as I said, the same fundamentals as you do for the physical risks. The other thing that the code does, and I think it's important in your context as well, the context of your sector, is that it really emphasizes that an employer cannot let their goal to produce a product or provide a service at a particular price override the duty to protect workers. And sometimes I think that message can be lost. And also, again, the model laws have that huge emphasis on consultation. And I think, as we've all noted, in the context of psychosocial risks, that's particularly important. So I think the survey is obviously an important prompt for university to review their obligations under the laws, and to have a good look at their safety systems and how they approach managing psychosocial risks in particular. Apart from anything else, I think there's probably almost a legal obligation for the leaders in the sector to know this, because as we know, they would all meet the definition of officers, and officers have due diligence obligations. And one of those obligations is to keep up to date with what's going on in your sector in terms of work health and safety, and making sure that you're aware of current issues, current temperature checks like these. So I would definitely be encouraging anyone who meets those officer duty definitions to have a good look at this, and to have a good think about what it means for the sector and for managing workers' psychological health going forward. So what else did I want to say? Yes, I think the thing about the psychosocial safety climate and the chart that Maureen put up, I think, is also that the questions that are asked are equivalent to those basic work health and safety fundamentals that I talked about as well. So questions around consultation about, like for me, leadership commitment, it also links back to those due diligence obligations. The consultation questions link back to the consultation representation obligations. So everything in that has a link back to the work health and safety legal obligations as well, which I think is important to remember. And then I guess the final point, a bit of data. The national data shows that mental health conditions now account for 12% of all serious workers' compensation claims. And over the past 10 years, they've increased by a phenomenal 160. And injury claims cost 4 times as much as physical injuries, and workers require nearly 5 times as long away from work in comparison to all other claims. So clearly a serious issue, and again, I commend the team for the work they've done, and also thank everyone who participated in the survey, because without your participation, we wouldn't be able to put the spotlight on some of these issues. So thanks again, everyone, and looking forward to hearing what your next steps are.
Thanks very much, Maureen. Yeah, it's really very helpful to understand that those principles of the psychosocial safety climate map onto the legal requirements and the fundamentals that underpin psychosocial risk management. And the code that you talk about is what we'll be referring to in our support documents to universities as well. It's a very helpful document, and enacting the code should actually lead to improvements in psychosocial safety climate. So thank you very much, Maureen, and now to Gabe.
Thanks, Maureen, and hello everybody, especially those people who participated in the survey. Without you, this sort of work can't be done. I'm currently on the land of the Bunawong people in Naarm, otherwise known as Melbourne, and would also like to pay my respects to the elders of the Bunawong and any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people who are on this call today. This is a great step forward for the university sector to have a truly sector-wide independent research into the well-being of the hundreds of thousands of people who work in universities. And we were very proud to sponsor the research along with Superfriend and Transitioning Well, because it's been desperately needed. Scott referred to workloads and restructuring. And our observation is, and the observation of our members is, that as workloads have increased and the pace of restructuring has increased, often, I've got to say, very badly managed change, with job displacement and job losses, and even those in ongoing positions in constant job insecurity. Up till now, we've only had anecdotal data on the impact on employees. And I've got to say, some of that anecdotal data is really harrowing. Talking to some of the people who've suffered serious mental health conditions as a result of their working environment has been really harrowing. But now, as a result of this, we actually have some hard data to objectively measure the impact on workers. And I've got to say the results are not surprising to us based on what our members have been telling us. Neither is the gap between senior management and the workers. And that's often reflected in the way that they respond when we try to raise these issues. But it's also reflected in a lot of, in some cases, a tick-the-box response to that. So we end up with workers being offered resources, as Maureen said, that can become psychosocial hazards themselves, or that are not useful. And we end up with that after-the-fact support through employee assistance programs, which are a bit like sticking a Band-Aid on after the injury's occurred. And we need the psychosocial climate data so that we can prevent the injury occurring in the first place. So yes, many universities will say to us, yes, we've got resources and yes, we've got supports, but whether they're useful and they actually help the employees is a really big issue for us. The thing about workloads, and I will go to workloads because it is a constant issue, and the data bears this out now. If you look at that, if you pick the middle of the academic levels, say level C, they're reporting about 10.5, a bit over 10.5 additional hours a week. That means for every level 3 level C academics, they're carrying the load of another full-time academic. And that's an indication of the level of under staffing. Now, if this was a manufacturing enterprise and you couldn't afford the inputs, you wouldn't be producing the same number of goods at the other end. But what we constantly see from the universities is we're going to reduce the inputs, that is the staff, but we're going to expect the same outputs at the end. And that's not entirely their fault. That is the sector desperately needs funding. It needs a new funding model. It needs jobs ready graduate package out the door, because there's been a very unfair package and has actually targeted many of the areas that are showing very high risk now. So I think the real advantage of this and the recommendations made by the group is that we can tackle it on a sector-wide basis. And we're really keen on working cooperatively with the universities to tackle it on a sector-wide basis. That's not to say that we won't be highly critical, particularly of those that are in the very, very low zone, because you can't have 92% of your staff in high risk and very high risk and not have known that that was an issue at your university. Is just inconceivable that you would have known that. So we're also happy. The recommendations about new funding, absolutely, about doing this regularly, about making it a thing that is as important in the legislation as student wellbeing is, are all really good recommendations, and we'll be campaigning hard to support them. I'm looking forward to delving into the data a bit more closely as time goes on, as we get time to do it. I would like to say, Scott, your presentation and your support for this is really welcomed, and your ability or your willingness to involve staff is really, really welcomed by us, and we would like to see that happening everywhere. And if more of these changes, the consultation had been genuine from the bottom up instead of directive from the top down, then I think we would have seen much better results across the sector. But I guess most importantly, I wanted to say thank you to Maureen and Kurt and Amy and Daniel for their work. They genuinely want to see the health and safety of university workers improved, as do we. and I'm sure they've got much more work to do on this, and we just wanted to thank them for producing this disturbing but nevertheless incredibly useful piece of work.
Thanks very much, Gabe. It's always really great to to listen to your interpretations of the information and you know, how it relates to the sector, and you know, noting Scott's, you know, reaction and how that sort of fits with really what we're after across the sector is really terrific. So our next actions is that the universities will all receive an individual report on their performance on each of the measures assessed in the census, along with a document outlining general suggestions for improvement within their organisation and the external supports available, and of course referring to the code of practice that Maureen mentioned. To build capability in the sector, we hope to convene a community of practice across the sector with the aim to, and then to try and build the capability, because, you know, a lot of people don't really know how to enact the regulations, how to assess risks, etc. So we would like to be part of that process and aim to evaluate progress across universities with another census in 2026. The NTEU will be running a seminar on the 25th of February, which will go into the results and be a bit more discursive and involve interactions. I encourage you to follow up with your university to find out what action is being taken. You can go to our website. I'll show you the details shortly. There will be a short report and a technical report. You can go there and you can print those out. You can distribute them around your university. If you on that website as well, we will also have the printout of the overall responses to each of the items of the survey, so that you can, you know, maybe look at those yourself to see what's going on. They're all confidential. No universities are ranked in that, so it's just in general. If you do need to talk to an EAP because you're feeling distressed at all, I think, you know, go ahead, but also think about talking about your issues to your health and safety representative, to your supervisor, to people from work health and safety, or to the union folk, because there are likely to be other people with similar issues to you. And these people will know what to do and how to help you. It's just, if you want to, you don't want to like try and internalize all the problems as your own, because they are social problems. You know, it could be that changes in the work environment could really help you. You go to the EAP, we never hear actually what you know, how that feeds back into the social system. So I would encourage that, but definitely you need, you know, if you need psychological help and support, you can go to counselling and stuff. There's no shame, but, you know, just think about other mechanisms and feeding back into the system for change. So these are our details. If you want to go to see the technical reports and the overview, you can go to the QR code and to that website. And also we're on LinkedIn, Psychosocial Safety Climate Global Observatory, here at the newly formulated Adelaide University. And there are our email addresses. So I'd like to thank you very much again, participants, for providing the information that you have. And I look forward to working with you again in the near future. Thank you very much.